Welcome to the Battle of the Bloodbenders, Amon versus Katara. If you think Amon is a one-trick pony or that Katara is an unmatched prodigy, then you're gonna want to keep watching because there are a lot more nuances to this matchup than you might think. I will explain why Amon is formidable even without his OP bloodbending, and I'll also answer the question as to whether Katara could control others without the full moon. No matter what you think the outcome will be, I promise by the end of this video, you'll appreciate both characters in a whole new light. This is the Versus series. So, I chose to examine a hypothetical matchup between Katara and Amon, mostly because this is the start of the resurrection of the Versus series on this channel. And this was the very first video I did with Avatar nearly a decade ago. That, and I believe this matchup will do a lot to explain how I will be approaching fights like these going forward. First, let's look at some brief backgrounds on these characters. Katara, a determined waterbender, emerged from the Southern Water Tribe's ruins as a fierce and compassionate leader. Driven by her mother's tragic loss during the Fire Nation's raid, Katara's unwavering spirit fueled her quest to master waterbending and restore balance to a war-torn world alongside Team Avatar. Noatak, from the Northern Water Tribe, was scarred by his father's ruthless bloodbending training and grew up resenting bending's dominance over non-benders, which led him to found and lead the Equalists of Republic City as the mass persona known as Amon. For Katara, I'll be looking at the 17-year-old version of her up until the graphic novel Imbalance. For Amon, I'll be looking at him as of the end of Book 1, The Legend of Korra. For this video, I should preface that I do have a bias against Katara because of her quick progression through the Airbender series. I've always thought that she went from novice to master waterbender far too quickly. I don't have much of an issue with other prodigy characters in the series like Aang, Toph, and Azula, as they all had years of training before they appeared in the show, with Aang having 12 years with the Masters in the Southern Air Temple, Toph spending most of her early life learning from the Badger Moles and honing her craft in the Earth Rumble arena, and Azula getting the best training under the tutelage of the Royal Fire Nation. But with Katara, she only had a waterbending scroll for a few weeks and a week or two at most with Master Pakku, and that's it. A little unbelievable for me, but sure, let's say she's the most talented prodigy of all the characters in the show. That's more an issue of narrative flow and authenticity, but I also do my best not to let that affect the outcome of matches she appears in on this channel. The lore clearly establishes that she is extremely talented, even if she shouldn't be so good so soon, logically, and this will be a direct factor in this matchup, so keep that in mind. Likewise, in the Legend of Korra show, after the reveal that Amon was a bloodbender and a waterbender, not some master-level, non-bending she-blocker, I sort of did an eye roll. Plus, the idea that bloodbenders are able to use their unique ability without the full moon never sat well with me as a power creep, and is the likely reason this scene happened in the show. But this video is not a critique of narrative or character development, but rather an examination of the fighting abilities of characters despite all that. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. If you want to skip to any part of the video, you can reference these time codes as I suspect this will be a longer one. Before getting into my thoughts, let's look at what the general fanbase tends to think of this matchup. On the side of Amon, Rodrigo Perez 5073 says that, honestly, I think Amon wins this one. If Katara had kept practicing bloodbending, she could have had a chance, but Amon's bloodbending makes him terrifying. While, on the other side of Katara, Osias Art says that, this seems like a slam dunk in Amon's favor until you remember that Katara can break out of a bloodbending grip. It's a lot more of an even match than people think. So, who do I side with? Let's find out. Let's be honest, most of this matchup hinges on bloodbending and bloodbending alone. Bloodbending is a rare and powerful subskill of waterbending in the Avatar universe, characterized by the ability to manipulate the fluids within a person's body. Despite the name of the ability, it's not actual bloodbending, but rather internal waterbending. And with humans being composed of 60% water, it makes sense why it's such a devastating technique. Bloodbending is considered highly taboo due to its invasive and unethical nature, as it violates the free will and autonomy of its targets, often resulting in pain and discomfort. The technique was prominently portrayed as a dark and forbidden art, with only a few skilled waterbenders possessing the ability to perform it, usually during a full moon when their bending is at its peak. Of course, this notion would get reframed with the emergence of the crime boss Yakone of Republic City, Amon's father, who showcased a talent for bloodbending without the use of the full moon and in full daylight. Fans have speculated that this stems from a genetic mutation that lives in the Yakone bloodline, with a character stating that, quote, his family has the strongest line of bloodbenders in history. Now, one could take this to mean genetic mutation, but since these statements are being made by a fallible character in his opinions, it's also possible that this ability is very much skill-based and developed, and Yakone was crazy enough to put his sons through the grinder to achieve such high talents with the ability. In fact, I tend to reject this notion outright that bloodbending without the full moon is solely some genetic mutation when we look at this quote from Avatar co-creator Michael DiMartino, who states that Yakone further developed the ability, learning how to physically bloodbend another person. So this would mean that this ability is significantly skill-based. I also reached out to one of my Avatar YouTuber contemporaries, Airspeed Prime, who had this to say.
The genetic part of this is obviously the known idea that you can have powerful bending lineages. The whole Zuko is related to Roku situation is because of this very concept, the royal family wanting to incorporate the line of a powerful bender and avatar into the royal family. And the same is true for the bloodbending line and how Yakone's sons have his same kind of ability. I don't think that the uniqueness of Yakone is specifically that he was born with the ability to do enhanced bloodbending. This feels like the equivalent of saying that you can have a bloodline ability that is called like enhanced water whip or enhanced insert waterbending move here. It's all waterbending, that's the point there. It is clearly more that he was born more naturally powerful in waterbending than your typical waterbender. I always break power in bending down into raw power, scale, and technical power, precision. So I think the Yakone line leans more in the technical precision side of things, obviously with some power also needed, but more technical, meaning he will never showcase that power as avatar state level waterbending coming from like a normal bender. So instead, this enhanced power is shown through his ability to do techniques that typically require an outside power boost, but without that boost. And for a waterbender, that technique is bloodbending, which typically requires the full moon. The idea is that his unique power makeup pushes him into the level where bloodbending is possible naturally for him. This is where he then develops or trains this power. It is still a delicate technique that needs some practice, and he is unique in being able to practice the technique at all times. So you can see how he takes bloodbending to a new level, not being restricted at a certain point to only training under the full moon. As for specifically how psychic bloodbending comes in, that just seems to be where bending goes at that super high level. Stuff like Boomy being able to earthbend with his face, Ming Hua doing what she's capable of doing with no arms, combustion bending as an ability. The idea of training to do the same stuff or more powerful stuff with less or no movement feels like the right path for a bender who has a high level of precision and power. So as we go on, it seems like Sokka's line about special benders at the trial of Yakone more highlights that naturally powerful benders are the ones who are more likely to learn or develop rare techniques easier, versus the initial interpretation that perhaps people are just specifically born with very specific abilities. That's not as much the case, I think, anymore.
And looking at the demonstrative feats of the Yakone family line, the notion of them being the strongest bloodbenders in history is entirely backed up, with Tarlok able to simultaneously bloodbend no less than 9 individuals to the point of unconsciousness while using his hands, Yakone able to bloodbend no less than 62 individuals at the same time, including the Avatar, without using his hands, and Amon elevating the ability to such heights that he could block another bender's chi to halt their use of the element, full stop. This is why any matchup against a bloodbender is often one-sided and over within moments. Either you can contend with the ability, or you cannot. There isn't a whole lot of in between. And with the example of Amon versus Tarlok, even if you do have the capability of fighting back, it still means you can be overmatched rather quickly. So, where does that leave Katara in this equation? To properly address this inquiry of the bloodbending grip, it's essential to first clarify the mechanics behind bloodbending. The technique typically necessitates the presence of the full moon, but the full moon solely enhances the potency of waterbending, and it doesn't grant any new abilities on its own. Instead, abilities stemming from its influence demand the full moon because they possess a minimum power threshold that most waterbenders can't reach without an extra wellspring of strength to tap into. The original Nick.com encyclopedia outright declares that bloodbending, quote, demands an immensely high amount of power. And Atuat, in the Shadow of the Kyoshi novel, of lowering a person's body temperature to decelerate their biological processes through the cooling of water in their veins, as requiring, quote, excessive raw power for the majority of benders. And this is shown to be true when Kyoshi freezes the blood of false avatar Yoon in the last chapters of the novel. Therefore, it appears that if a waterbender possesses the skill and finesse to perform bloodbending, but is unable to without a full moon, it implies they simply lack the necessary strength. This is where things get a bit tricky and where the divergence of thought happens within the fanbase. At a base level, it seems rather clear that the hierarchy of bloodbenders goes Yakone and Amon at the top, Tarlok just below them, then Katara, and then Hama. This comes by way of logic of demonstrative feats, with Yakone and Amon having the most impressive showcases, with Yakone's courtroom feat, Amon's ability to indefinitely block chi and outmatching his brother, Tarlok bending 9 people at once, Katara overpowering Hama, and Hama being at the bottom as the originator. But there is a key line that fans debate over from Katara, where she says, quote, my bending is more powerful than yours, Hama. Your technique is useless on me. It's this line here that gets fans thinking that Katara is simply powerful enough to surpass Amon's hold. And as I stated near the beginning of this video, there is some precedence for that, as we've seen Katara push through situations that demanded more power from her than what she has shown before. So one could argue that she can push through based on pure willpower. This, however, is extremely speculative, and falling into an acceptance of total plot armor, which is understandable considering this is something Katara has done in the past. Could Katara learn this level of bloodbending? With enough training, perhaps. I would even say it's most likely. The issue is that she outlawed the ability and never used it past the time she used it when she went on her field trip of revenge with Zuko. So she was not honing her craft in the same way that Noatak and Tarlok were since childhood. So it's more logical to say, in universe, that her skill would not match the Yakone family line. And even if one believes she can, it would take a fair few steps for her to reach Amon's level, and it's my belief that Katara doesn't even surpass the likes of Tarlok, who was outdone by Amon and their father, as she simply does not have the feats to suggest that she can, nor the training to match the Yakone family. And this is all assuming Katara could suddenly master the ability without the full moon. So far in the lore, she is only capable of using the ability with the full moon. Some fans believe she already showcased an ability to bloodbend without the full moon, but I debunked that notion in this video. The too long, did not watch version is simply that there was always a full moon when she used the ability, as shown from the visual language of the show, and even if one believes she did, it would not make sense with the logic of the Yakone court case, where Sokka and several of Katara's own contemporaries were surprised by the notion of Yakone bloodbending without the full moon, establishing that it is not something Katara was capable of doing prior to that point. But let's say Amon and Katara met under the light of a full moon, for whatever reason. Does that mean Katara would have a better chance? Waterbending is greatly strengthened and enhanced during the night, due to its lunar affinity. During a full moon in particular, waterbending is greatly elevated, to the point where a single waterbender can overpower multiple opponents with relative ease. This is outright stated in Avatar Extras, which says, quote, a waterbender is most powerful during a full moon. However, this elevation goes across the board. So if Amon is more powerful than Katara in her base form, then he is more powerful than her in their elevated form as well. Remember, bloodbending is possible for the likes of Hama and Katara because of the boost of the full moon. The full moon doesn't magically grant bloodbending. But there is another hanging thread here. Is Amon's bloodbending grip really all that infallible? After all, Mako and Korra were able to break his hold. Mako isn't even a waterbender, and Korra was devoid of her waterbending at the time she broke free. Well, the answer to why that happened comes by way of the novelization of the last episode of Korra, Endgame. In the novel, Korra's internal monologue described that she can feel Amon's bloodbending grip has been weakened, but only after he had been shocked by Mako's lightning. One could say that it could be a mark against Amon that he got shocked at all, but I see this more as a good showing for Mako, rather than a bad showing for Amon, who was caught off guard. There's a lot going on in that final sequence of Korra's Book 1 finale, and I'd like to pass on that explanation over to Airspeed Prime once more.
My take on Korra breaking through Amon's bloodbending grip is a combination of accumulated damage on Amon. He did get hit by lightning by Mako, a somewhat heavy use of his technique already, and Korra having a huge moment of growth that unlocks her airbending for the first time. There's probably something to be said for her being energized by a new element unlock, but also huge stock needs to be given to the confidence and power of this moment of personal growth. Her, without her bending, stepping up to defend her friend, a moment that earns her her airbending. A strong enough overall feeling and drive to break through the grip of a shocked Amon who has just seen his ultimate technique, taking bending away, seemingly fail. I don't really think there's a super technical explanation for this like there is with how he actually takes bending away. This one I do think is more about the moment, giving Korra such incredible willpower to fight through Amon's grip. Again, there is some sense of precedence for the idea that unlocking or using your element for the first time being a powerful experience. Ki from the comics, for example, when she firebends for the first time, seems to burn through a door that I think even an experienced firebender would struggle with. But again, I think it is more about the character moment for Korra in the positive and perhaps Amon in the negative that is bigger than the technical stuff. It's the willpower battle that really is at play here.
Can someone say that it's possible for Katara to break out of Amon's bloodbending grip? Sure, you can argue it, but more evidence points in the other direction. Note the Korra Endgame book and Amon's internal strain. Hama's cap, as far as we could see, was the bloodbending of 2 individuals in Aang and Sokka, whereas Tarlok's cap is a little under a dozen, and Amon and Yakone are at least whole courtrooms. Now, usually I do not like power scaling, as it diminishes other factors of a fight that can be more important, like skill and style. But in this case, when bloodbending is such a narrow ability, power scaling and willpower is, unfortunately, the only option. But there is one comparison that is pretty damning for Katara. In the final episode of the first season of Korra, Katara attempts to reverse the effects of Amon's chi block on Korra, to which she says, quote, "I've tried everything in my power, but I cannot restore Korra's bending." This, and the fact that Amon and Yakone have taken bloodbending to the levels of psychic bending, should not be scoffed at. In fact, besides the likes of psychic combustion bending from Combustion Man and Pali, or the face bending Bumi was doing in Book 2, and the unassisted flight from Zahir, this is perhaps the strongest form of bending shown in the entire show, as all other benders in bending showings come by way of the martial art of bending, specific sets of movements, rather than pure displays of the mind. The visual language of this is clear, especially when regarding Tarlok, who always had to use his hands to bloodbend, while his father and older brother did not have to. So to me, it's pretty clear that the bloodbending advantage goes to Amon over Katara. Things get pretty inconclusive when it comes to a comparison of waterbending between the two characters. And really, for me, it's unlikely that this matchup ever gets to a contest of waterbending blows, but if it does, based on feats, it should go to Katara. Not because she's an extraordinarily more powerful or skillful waterbender inherently, but because of a technicality. For viewers new and old, this was one of the points I said would be a great example for how I'll be dealing with versus matchups on this channel going forward. You see, the contest of water between Katara and Amon is inconclusive, but technically goes to Katara for this reason. Amon only has one waterbending feat, his major water spout that he created after getting thrown from the pro bending arena and into Yue Bay during the finale. Since Amon only has a single waterbending feat, we can only speculate what his combative skill and style is with the element. Logically, he should be one of, if not the best, waterbenders we've seen on the show based on the fact that he is one of, if not the best, bloodbenders in the franchise. This is extrapolated from the fact that it takes a very skilled waterbender to bloodbend at all, similar to how only skilled earthbenders can metalbend. In fact, bloodbending and metalbending are quite similar in that way. in that it isn't really blood or metal that is inherently being bent, but rather the water around blood and the earth within metal that is being manipulated on an extremely minuscule level. I say this to illustrate how skilled and strong Amon likely is as a waterbender, even if we've never seen him properly waterbend. But with my system, I cannot put him above Katara as a more skilled waterbender because she has more concrete and demonstrative feats than Amon. And the hierarchy of my system of versus laws places a character's quantity and consistency of feats, Katara's extensive resume, above another character's non-combative feat, Amon's singular water spout. That said, there still is an argument for Amon being a more powerful waterbender, if not a more skilled waterbender, than Katara, based primarily on Katara's fight with Hama. Again, going back to this quote, Katara outright says that Hama's bloodbending is ineffective against Katara, suggesting Katara is simply more powerful than Hama. And this would extend to Amon as well if we believe that he is the stronger bloodbender than Katara, based on his extensive and demonstrative achievements with the ability. In particular, we can scale Amon's pure waterbending power alongside his father. You see, Yakone was able to bloodbend Avatar Aang effectively until Aang got saved by the Avatar state. And in terms of base waterbending abilities, Aang has the greatest achievement with water in being able to extinguish one of Ozai's Sozin Comet flames. This is significant because according to Ozai, firebenders would be boosted by 100 times. Now, to be clear, I don't adhere to power scaling via mathematical calculations as you might see on certain battle boards or Death Battle. My assessments will always be based on the logic of the narrative first and foremost where possible. There will be times when numbers have to be involved, of course, but that's an absolute last resort for me. Sometimes, numbers can be flawed. That's why you get quotes from Roku saying there were 1,000 lifetimes in the Avatar cycle and fans taking that literally, when in reality, there are far, far less Avatars than that. More on that in this video. The creators of the show aren't sitting down and calculating kinetic forces of these bending abilities, and characters tend to speak in hyperbolic terms for dramatic effect. All this to say that Aang has the greatest power showing of waterbending based on the Sozin's Comet boost. This is further solidified when we see that Katara was not able to brute force her way through Azula's flame during their catacomb fight, suggesting again that Aang's base level water is more powerful, as Ozai is factually more powerful than Azula during the time of the show, which is backed up by the narrative thread that Ozai is the final boss. Now, we can debate whether or not Aang is a better waterbender than Katara, but what isn't debatable is that Aang is a more powerful waterbender, thanks to being the Avatar for one. So, if you hold to the idea that a stronger waterbender can break the grip of a bloodbender, that still goes to the Yakone family, as we've seen from Father Yakone, who forced Aang under his grip, the most powerful base waterbender at the time. There are those who might debate whether or not Amon is as strong as his father, including myself, but again, the narrative makes it clear that Amon elevated his father's psychic bloodbending by way of blocking the chi pass of other benders indefinitely. So, at the very least, Amon should be his father's equal or just below him, if not his definitive better, since he doesn't have any feats that put him on par with bloodbending an entire courtroom. In any case, since Amon is more likely a powerful bloodbender than Aang, he is also a more powerful waterbender than Katara. And I can't emphasize enough that I mean more powerful, not more skillful, which cannot be determined because Amon's lack of feats in that regard. Because a less powerful bender can always be a more powerful one by having more skill and ingenuity. To touch on it a little more, Amon's singular waterbending feat is significant because it's an ability only seen from high-ranking masters. The only waterbender seen using the ability is Aang while in the Avatar state, Pakku during the Siege of the North with a full moon, Katara when she escaped the catacombs, Korra in the pro-bending arena, Unalaq and perhaps the most underrated and best showing of the ability, which I'm sure I'll get into when I feature Unalaq in the Versus series, and of course Minghua at the Northern Air Temple. Again, I say this only to give an example of what Amon's capabilities as a pure waterbender might likely be. In my own headcanon, the way bloodbending should work is a contest of skill, especially when dealing with the minute levels of water in the bloodstream. But when attempting to be objective to what's presented in the narrative of the show, all signs point to pure power, so that's what we have to go with. Thus, waterbending is an inconclusive advantage for Katara by way of technical skill, which goes to her on a technicality of feats, though I do hold Amon as an inherently stronger waterbender. Normally, this will be a breakdown of a hypothetical fight, with an examination of the early, mid, and late fight. But the victory here is so narrow and likely going to happen in the space of a few seconds that I'll forego that to speak on this in a more general sense. But remember, when I look at matchups, I'm not looking for a single scenario victor alone. I'm looking for a victor who is most likely to win a majority of the time, usually within the space of 10 out of 10 matchups. And in short, there are far more likely scenarios for one character's victories over the other. First and foremost, Katara needs a full moon to even consider competing with Amon, so she would only potentially be effective against him 0.03% of the time in a single month, or 10% in a single month if we think that the full moon powers can last over a 3-night period, instead of a 1-night period, which again I go into more in this video. So from jump, Amon has a 90 to 97% chance to defeat Katara straight out with no contest. The only possible basis of contention is within a space of 10% of all scenarios or less. But even in that 10%, it wouldn't be that much different based on the lore of waterbenders and the full moon. The full moon boosts all waterbenders, and simply put, Amon is a stronger bloodbender based on scaling from other characters and their demonstrative achievements with the ability. The only real rebuttal is if one believes that Katara is a stronger waterbender and can conclusively break Amon's grip. But that's excessively speculative and bordering on a reliance on plot armor for Katara. That's the reason I don't use characters like Iroh in the Versus series often, a character who has loads of reputation, but no real fights against notable opponents to test that reputation against. These notions delve too far into the realm of pure speculation. But in these scenarios where Katara potentially wins by making this matchup one dominated by waterbending, her victories there would not come easy, as she'd be facing another master who has more raw power. At best, I would give a 6 out of 10 advantage to Katara against Amon based on her having more feats of skill, if not having feats of pure power that matches Amon. But that's only 6 out of 10 matches out of a fraction of all scenarios. And that's only if we give a full moon boost to Katara and not to Amon, which is far too specific a scenario that would logically never occur in the series. Of course, your speculation miles may vary, but in terms of bloodbending achievements, Amon has Katara beat rather conclusively. Despite the possibility of alternative interpretations, unshakable statements from the creators that are also backed up by the narrative, and the evident feats of the Yakone family solidify that this mastery of bloodbending is skill-based rather than a genetic mutation or purely based in power. When analyzing the hierarchy of bloodbenders, Yakone and Amon emerge at the apex, closely followed by Tarlok, Katara, and Hama, in terms of demonstrated abilities. While fans speculate about Katara's potential to break free from Amon's grip, evidence leans toward the contrary, bolstered by Amon's proficiency in psychic bloodbending and his capacity to block chi. A chi block even Katara could not penetrate or reverse. Thus, Amon's mastery of this skill, supported by his and Yakone's achievements, places him in a formidable position against other waterbenders, including Katara. Of all the scenarios, what is most likely to happen is a quick victory for Amon on a majority of days without a full moon during the month. Without a full moon, Katara would not have any form of defense and Amon would bind her in his grip, eventually taking her bending as he has done to so many others. And in the few cases where she does have the full moon, it wouldn't matter at all because Amon's abilities would be elevated as well. In these slim chance scenarios, what is most likely to happen is something similar to what we saw between Amon and Tarlok, with Amon playing himself and Katara playing the role of Tarlok, with Katara being able to slow Amon down briefly, but ultimately being overpowered in the end. Therefore, in my opinion, Amon takes a rather conclusive 10 out of 10 victories against Katara. Of course, this is just my opinion based on the lore of the Avatar franchise. Do you agree that Amon takes a near shutout victory against Katara? Or do you believe Katara has a better chance to break his bloodbending grip? Let me know in the comments below and check out my Versus series playlist on screen. As always, peace, love, and remember, be water, my friends.